Misogyny, a term which describes the distortion and denigration of female images in a patriarchal culture. Women are viewed as things and goods. Not only women are machines for bearing children, women are also responsible for continuing the male line of the family. Pessimism, on the other hand, is a perspective that believes things will turn out badly, with an overarching conviction that suffering and evil rule the world. It comes from the Latin word pessimus, which means worst. This video will explore the idea of misogyny against women through the aid of fiction across the 18th to 20th centuries, which in the end led to pessimism. The first and early novel that describes misogyny was Moll Flanders by a notable English author, Daniel Defoe, in 1722. In Moll Flanders, women were represented as passive and submissive, among other things. Daniel Defoe suggests that Moll's circumstances and subsequent life of crime are closely related to her gender, in which, in the 17th century England, women has few choices as it centered solely around a male-dominant societal structure. In the novel, Moll does not have the same rights and liberties as men, such as the right to receive education and the possession of private properties. The only options available to women are marriage or going to service, which entails working as a maid or servant. The idea of pessimism slowly builds up in the protagonist when Moll got married multiple times in order to have a perfect and secure life, but it turned out that marriage failed to provide her with the strong social and financial security that she longed for. Moll then took up another turn by involving herself in criminal activities. Moll's pessimistic behavior can be analyzed through the feminist angle when Moll is willing to sacrifice herself by becoming a prostitute and committing criminal acts, as that is what society molded her to be at a particular time. Venture into the 19th century, one of the most well-known fiction that conveyed misogyny treatment of women is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, 1813. Austen's styles of writing during the 19th century were cherished due to impromptu outpourings of a viscerage parlor as tiny systems of light and energy full of delicate and love. Pride and Prejudice centered on the value of marriage, which is salient for women to be recognized and to have secure finances, property, and security. The idea of pessimism was demonstrated when Mrs. Bennet, the mother of the protagonist, Elizabeth, and her four sisters, viewed that marriage is the only ticket for women to experience a happy life. The business of her life was to get her daughters married, writes Austen of this obsession. In fact, Mrs. Bennet's desire to organize her daughter's wedding can be explained by social attitudes toward marriage, which were believed to define a woman's happiness and her status in society. It is stated in the first chapter, quote, "It is a universally acknowledged fact that a single man who has wealth must be in need of a wife."
Charlotte! My dear Lizzie, I've come here to tell you the news. Mr. Collins and I are engaged.
Engaged?
Yes.
To be married?
Yes, of course, Lizzie. What other kind of engaged is there? Oh, for heaven's sake, Lizzie, don't look at me like that. There is no earthly reason why I shouldn't be as happy with him as any other.
But he's ridiculous.
Oh, hush. Not all of us can afford to be romantic. I've been offered a comfortable home and protection. There's a lot to be thankful for.
Charlotte.
I'm 27 years old. I've no money and no prospects. I'm already a burden to my parents. And I'm frightened. So don't judge me, Lizzie. Don't you dare judge me.
Another type of fiction in the 19th century is a short story titled The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, an American author who represents how women were treated in a patriarchal society. The short story was published in 1894, with marriage being the idea of misogyny against women. The Story of an Hour is a tale of an emotionally repressed woman with a heart condition, Mrs. Millard, who was one day told about the news of her husband's death. Upon receiving the news, she does not give the expected reaction that a wife would give when knowing their husband has died. Instead, she realizes the freedom she has. It was a release from oppression. In a short story, it stated, "Free, free, free," cries Millard, since her husband is dead. Her heart condition is no longer a concern to herself. Her physical state is warm and relaxed. Through this, we can conclude that Mrs. Millard is hoping for a pessimistic outcome from the news regarding her husband's death, as it gives her freedom when marriage at that time only caged her inside and to be a slave for her husband. Stepping into the 20th century, one fiction that will be taken as a reference is regarded as a notable prosaic of art, as it integrated political and artistic works into one whole, and it is titled Animal Farm by George Orwell. Eric Arthur Blair, alias George Orwell, was one of the distinguished novelists, essayists, and critics of the 20th century. His novel, Animal Farm, was published in England in 1945 and demonstrates the events leading up to the Russian Revolution in 1917 and on into the Stalin era of the Soviet Union. Though the novel portrayed the brutal dictatorship of Joseph Stalin by embodying fictional characters through allegorical animal representation, it is also wrapped with the element of sexism, which can be seen from the feminist angle. Androcentrism is reflected by Orwell in a book where women characters can be seen as weak and have no discourse power. Androcentrism is a practice of placing one's worldview, culture, and history around a masculine idea which marginalizes femininity on a cultural level. Androcentrism in the novel leads to pessimism among women characters. To buttress, Clover and Muriel are horrified when Animal Farm becomes a totalitarian state under Napoleon, but they lack the power to fight the pigs. They notice that the 7 commandments have changed, but they still believe everything the pigs say. They essentially become a silent observer of corruption. Due to the lack of power in voicing their minds, pessimism occurs within them when the only way to survive is to obey, even if it causes damage to many. Taking everything into account, each piece of fiction that was addressed was meticulously picked, as it successfully portrayed the idea of misogyny against women and how it ultimately led to pessimism. From what has been discussed, the 18th to 20th centuries show how women were ill-treated by bringing up their efforts and the turbulence that they had to face just for the sake of survival. Due to the woman's lack of many aspects in regard to the decision-making of their own lives, women began to develop a pessimism view toward society.